considered one of the most powerful and original artists in America today. His work has been shown at the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney Museum, the Guggenheim, the Walker Museum, and film festivals across Europe, and MoCA here in Los Angeles. Currently, he teaches at the San Francisco Art Institute and UC Berkeley. His films are the result of his interest in the world, particularly the space and form of the city. His interest in architecture and the perception of architecture is made clear in his title for this lecture, Urban Spaces and Spaces of the Mind. By choosing a path through some place in the city, he presents the place to us in a way which gets at some fundamental and unseen quality of the place, and also causes us to consider the way we look at all places. Although I have never seen any of his films, I am imagining what they might be like from notes given to me by Deborah Cohen, his friend and the organizer of this lecture. Notes written arcing across a gridded page in an elegant but difficult to decipher hand. Also, I am trying to imagine what the films might be like from their evocative titles, such as Serene Velocity, Weight, Transparency, Still, Shift, Sidewalk Shuttle, and This Side of Paradise. Titles all referring to motion, position, time, and perception. Gehr talks of cupping his hand in front of the camera in an attempt to make light and color tactile, as if trying to touch light or color before it enters the lens. He says he tries to make the ephemeral tangible. On one occasion, he replaced the lens of his camera with a piece of plastic found on the street, and with this attempted to break the perspectival structure of the film. Here's a quote from a review of Sidewalk Shuttle in Art Week. We couldn't quite believe our eyes. A nearby rooftop mushroomed up while the sidewalk remained static. Huge buildings on their sides coasted by with the gravid majesty of a tanker as seen from the Golden Gate Bridge. Streets and sidewalks sheared up to the sky like cliffs of Yosemite. An upside-down penthouse soared over the San Francisco Bay serenely as a zeppelin. The film that's being described was made simply with a 16mm movie camera looking out the glass elevator of San Francisco's Fairmont Hotel. Ernie Gehr shows us the cities we live in as they are. His films remind us to look. I'm honored to introduce our guest this evening, Ernie Gehr.
Thank you. I brought 3 films for this evening's program. None of the films have titles, so I would like to give them to you. The first film on the program is Eureka, and that was completed in 1974. It's 30 minutes long and silent. The second film on the program is Sidewalk Shuttle, 1991. 41 minutes sound. And the third film is going to be This Side of Paradise, 1991, 14 minutes sound. Just a few words before we start the screening. I will be more than glad to engage in a dialogue after the screening, but I would prefer to have all 3 films shown consecutively. There will be a very brief pause between reels. That's 2 pauses between the first and the second film and the second and the third film while the projectionist changes reels. It should not last more than a minute to 2 minutes at the most. Suggest just stay where you are, although if you want to, feel free to get up and stretch. The first film, Eureka, is essentially composed of footage from a 1903 film that was recorded in San Francisco just before the earthquake, which took place in 1906, for those who may be familiar with that history. And the second film, as Richard mentioned, Sidewalk Shuttle, was recorded also in San Francisco, though the sounds come from elsewhere. And I'll be glad to discuss that matter after the screening. The third film perhaps needs a little bit more information. Just as a background, the film in 1989, I was in Berlin, at the time still West Berlin, visiting some friends, and at some point just before I left Berlin, about 3 days before leaving, I stumbled upon an area which used to be at one time the center of Berlin, and now it's just this huge flea market, referred to at that point as the Polish flea market. Essentially, there were hundreds, possibly a couple thousand, Polish and other East Europeans who had crossed over the border just for the weekend for the most part, with whatever they could carry across the border, and try to make sell whatever they had in return to their country with hard Western currency. I was quite moved by what I was encountering, and I had 5 rolls and a movie camera with me, as well as a tape recorder, which wasn't working properly, but I chose to, for some unknown reason at the time, to just go ahead and film, document, not so much the space as my impressions of what I was witnessing, or what I thought I was witnessing, what was moving me to linger on in that space and those sounds that I was hearing. And it was only upon returning to San Francisco, where I've been living since 1988, that I thought I actually wanted to make a film out of that material. At first, when I was in Berlin, I thought all I wanted to do is document my impressions and just show it to a few friends back home. But as it turned out, I used that material to make a film, and that is the last film on the program. Again, the whole program is possibly around 74 minutes long, and after the screening, I'll be more than glad to respond to any questions or comments that you might have. Thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoy the program.
Craig. We're taking forever back now. What party? Party here. Party. I'm gonna get out. Can you do the libation already? Here. What thing that's nice and pretty? Message? Looking good, so you don't you have it? Kom in.
Very popular and it's like, I don't know where, yeah. I like that Ferry Building. I don't like that noise. Imagine if I lived in a and they have like a patio on the roof.
So, van Wijnkeken, die houdt aanschließen. Die Person, die oder eigentlich die Spieler vorbereiten, kann auf stellen, alles lesen, dann darfst du nachher Kopf eigentlich. Nimmst du den Stand auf die Video gleichzeitig. Jedes einzelne Bild tut eine unheimliche Arbeit.
This is where we started. Start up high.
Dai, comincia nel biondo.
Non te l'audi a cercare un buon biglietto.
Ma va, sì, io dago... Ascolta, sta attenta, non voglio skate.
Te la gratis.
Sì, ma così vendi che me dai skate.
Oggi lo vedi.
Ah, in giro,
Quello è il problema, è solo quello.
ma lo sai che ti vai in giro a vendere?
Ma è dentro che ne dà la gente.
Mica sotto il giro.
In giro sono. I milionari.
No, te così, te non voglio skate.
Vete pugliese fredda, dove tutto?
15 and a half. 15 and a half. That side.
This one, 17.
Universal.
Is that the 16?
What size do you want now?
16.
You want a 16?
Is that
This is 16, huh?
these long sleeves?
Yeah. For you, 15 and a half.
16, 15 and a half, 16.
15 and a
What
half.
continental size? 39?
No, not a 50, man. You want it large? 16.
Nie problem, 604 no.
Ale to co z tym
No ja, eine komplett prot. Nie, 610, nie, prot, daj, prot. No weźcie wszystko.
Eine Mark. Eine Mark.
O też ma pewnie bardzo.
Zal maar even.
To ma się
Oddać 4 marki. Nie chcesz? Eine Mark.
Dan tu jest facade nawiązuje. Tak można.
Chcę kupić, tylko nie wiem, wiesz co tego, to jest Amerykanów.
Może się zamienimy. Oddać 4 marki. Nie chcesz? Eine Mark.
Dan tu jest facade nawiązuje.
Jak dla nich Einmark. Nie masz. Ja.
Denmark.
Z tego, z pociągu w tym, w Kunowicach.
Na peronie.
Mesjanskie te.
Zaskoczył mnie. Że tam sam sprzedaje.
To jest to. Korzenie tu zapuszczę.
Ik wil je bedanken.
Ben böyle elinde tutuyorum.
Jetzt nachher was. Die Spitzen sind oben dann so längs geschnitten.
Ara verir seçerlim babası.
İşte ele get kesersin.
Baba! Baba!
Ein Zug bitte. Ein Zug komplett. Gut.
A, co grande. Kręćmy się o
Eingewonnen, nicht der Ball. Maradona Ball. 1, 2, 3. Wo ist Ball jetzt? Bitte schön. Ball. Hallo, das ist mein Kuchen.
Hallo. What the fuck? Scheiße. 19 los. Scheiße. 1, 2, 3. Wo ist ihr? Hallo, stopp. 100, ja? Bitteschön. 100 kriegen Sie, ja? Ja, nein, nein. Hallo. Korrekt spielen, korrekt sein. Mitgefahren, Marathonabfahrt. 1, 2, 3. Widzisz? Jest płytę.
Shit! A ja tu taką kurtkę takie, tak? Tutaj. Czego tam wygląda? Mama.
Dwa.
Jeszcze będzie brał. Kurwa, tylko trzeba ciągnąć.
Wie masz.
Ty tego co chcesz.
15. Podasz mu na palce. Und erste wollte ich 7 zu 9. Ja.
No chodź. Nie. 10 minut start. Good, good, madam, good, good. Ty firma, madam, ty firma. Ty firma, ty firma. Madam, ty firma. Ty firma. Ty firma. Policaj, pociąg musi jechać. Ach, przepraszam. To nie chcę zapłacić. Problem. Tajny biznes, tajny. Tajny biznes, Polen tajny biznes. Problem. Aj, tajny problem.
Ja na wymianę nie jestem. Ja sobie wziąłem 20 lewy na Bułgarii. I to 20 lewy.
A kto je wam pasa? Dlaczego wy nie bierzecie? Reszty nie trzeba wydawać. Eine Mark.
Dreimal. Material oryginalne. Zweimal. Eine Mark.
Jak uspłyje das.
Eine Mark.
O też ma
O, no kulturalnie.
Dov'è stasera?
Może się zamienimy? Oddać 4 marki. Nie chcesz? Eine mark.
Ten tu jest, ten nawiązuje. Tak można.
Zwanzig Mark.
10 Mark. Wie viel Preis?
12 Mark.
I got some vodka here, lemonade. Well, specifically, let's see. First of all, I work with the medium of film, and if you have ever dealt with the medium of film, you know you can run a ribbon of film through the projector, forwards, backwards. You can show an image right side up, whatever that means. You can also turn it upside down. Okay, so sometimes I would do things. There's never been one reason for doing any specific, let's say, use a specific technique. There usually be 2 or 3 reasons for doing it, but that would be one reason. In a film like Sidewalk Shuttle, there are ways of seeing, running it backwards for myself. Again, I hope that the works are open to various different interpretations, not just one, and my own way of seeing it is just one among many ways of looking at the work if one gives oneself to looking at it. But I tend to see it sometimes as memory. You know, when you try to recall something, you're reeling back in time. You're trying to recall something that once took place. For example, towards the end of Sidewalk Shuttle, the shot before the very end, the camera is moving up, and everything looks normal, except we have these cars that are backing up. Within this program, I found it very moving to see the way they're moving backwards, these small little inches back in time, while I was still remembering Eureka, the images of Eureka, and the way people are moving through the space. Vehicles, animals, and human beings are interacting within that space called a street. Whereas in contemporary times, within the space that you see, you hardly ever see people crossing the street except with their lights. Something has happened in the course of a century to our society, and it's something that I hope people can pick up on their own. I don't want to say it, but those are some of the reasons for having shots going reverse sometimes. I'm also amused by the, let's say, optical contradictions that tend to exist. There are visual contradictions, perceptual optical plays that you have in the film. Sometimes the image is upside down, but you're looking at an image and it looks right side up. It's crazy. How is it possible? From the beginning of the shot that this is a shot where you're seeing tails out first, upside down, and yet the windows look like right side up. You're looking right, you're moving up, aren't you? Rather than down. Which way is up, down? And there are plays too between, let's say, sound and image, and in a similar way. For example, I find it amusing to hear a sound seeming to move forward, where you hear a car or you hear a voice saying some word or a phrase, and yet everything else is moving backwards. There's a contradiction if you wish to see it as a picture window only. So, hopefully it's okay. Thank you. I want to apologize for the sound. It's something beyond our ability to improve it. The hum is unfortunately, and the sound should have been more audible, but it's sometimes a problem. But I also want to thank Eric. He did a wonderful job projecting. Thank you. Yeah. There was a hand. Yeah. I'm hearing a third of what you're saying. I'm sorry. Could you speak up? The first one, yes, Eureka, yeah. Okay, I'm having a problem hearing. I know I sometimes have a problem hearing. Anyway, let's see. I'm getting lost with the word tungsten. Sidewalk shuttle. What format? It's all shot in 60 millimeter daylight. Film. Wait a minute, not daylight. Tungsten film. Yes. I didn't use a filter, an 85 filter to correct for daylight. Tungsten, for those who may not be familiar with film, is so-called a indoor film stock. Okay, it's balanced for indoor lighting rather than daylight. And in order to use it outdoors, you need to use a kind of orange filter, which sometimes referred to as 85 filter. And when I was filming, I didn't use it, but not because I didn't want to, but simply that I wanted the image to be as clear as possible. And the camera that I had created a problem. Sometimes I couldn't see as sharply the detail within the picture. It's a small little viewer that I had to work with. And then I tried to have the print corrected. Now, what happened on this occasion is we're using a so-called xenon light projector. Okay, the bulb is much cooler. It's leaning towards blue, And the print that has been projected was timed for a warmer bulb, so you end up with a cooler image than you would see it if it was projected on a different projector. Those things are, unless you make all these different prints, which I cannot afford as an independent filmmaker, and then call and say, what kind of a projector are you going to use? So I'll show you this print rather than that, are unavoidable, and you just have to live with that. But is that what you were asking me, or am I not answering the question? Okay. I wanted a daylight image. I didn't want to make it too cold, all right? However, I fought very much with a timer in the sense that I didn't want the image to match color-wise from shot to shot. I wanted discrepancies. I felt that's fine, that's okay. But I would have liked a slightly warmer image, okay? But the last film, This Side of Paradise. This Side of Paradise. I'm tempted to, except for this microphone, or that's one reason I'm standing here, to come forward so I can hear you better. Just 1 second. The rewinding is terminating in a second, and then we'll be able to talk easier. Okay. Oh, you want to finish? Okay, all right. Could you... The photographs of who? I am not familiar with his work. Well, let's see, around the time that I made, I see what you mean. I'm shifting over to another film, yeah. I'm just not familiar with the work, so I can't comment, okay. Yes? Yeah, I would have done it, sure. It is, but so is the subject. And one of the things that attracted me to it, I felt that it was almost like a restaging of the 1930s as I walked into this flea market. And well, Berlin would have been my hometown. That's where I would have been living even now, had history been, had gone in a different direction than it did. I don't know. I don't know. Possibly, but I would say at this point it's much grimmer than what it was in 1991, 89 rather, when I encountered it. Again, I walked into this flea market about 3 days before the wall came down that separated so-called East from West Berlin. And Yes, it is a depressing film. Let's, yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. I also, even in some ways, while I did want to sound clearer, I felt it was okay to come out for that particular film, for the last one, somewhat murky, just as I felt the camera work, I was, you might say, somewhat sloppy, like home movie-ish like, and I felt it was appropriate for what I was encountering. I felt a different kind of an approach, a more cooler approach, as I might have used for sidewalk shuttle. And by the way, the title sidewalk shuttle is side/walk/shuttle. Okay, not just three words one after another. The camera work was appropriate, and it would have been a mistake to be, to have more beautifully. Well, I think some of the images are beautiful in themselves, but a kind of a more self-composed image. I wanted something that had that roughness to it. Yes. In 1974, I was invited to a film festival in Switzerland, and I was given a 21-day ticket because it was the cheapest ticket I could find. And I wasn't at the time, I wasn't interested in going. I didn't know what I would do. I didn't have to be at the festival except for the last 5 days when my own work was being shown. And I finally said, well, I guess I can go to bookstores, record stores, museums, etc. I wasn't interested in walking around the streets. But once I got to Europe, I was very much caught up with the artifacts of the past, as I found them, these fragments all over the place. Couldn't separate the present from the past. Wasn't so much interested in the present as much as these just relics, you might say. And it was a very moving trip. Never went to a museum. I felt the cities that I moved through, mainly Paris and Amsterdam, were enough museums for me, enough to deal with. It was also, for me, beginning of trying to deal with a history that I didn't want to deal with up to then. There's closing the door to essentially history of Europe in the 20th century. And towards the end of the trip, I went to Switzerland, and there a friend showed me the original film of Market Street, San Francisco, and I was very, very moved by it. The original film runs about 5 minutes, 4 or 5 minutes, and you see most of it except the very end. At the end of in the original film, the camera turns around, and you have all these kids waving and jumping at the camera. Okay, so otherwise you see all of it. The two cuts that happen in the film were in the film itself. As I was looking at the film, and I'm giving a slightly longer story because this is all connected, how I got to it. First of all, I couldn't believe the film itself. I thought it was a marvelous film. I just couldn't believe that it was just going on and on and on. Normally, you see these 5, 10, 15-second clips of streetcars, shots recorded from a streetcar, but hardly ever a long, extended shot where you're really allowed to see things and not just geared into something else. And while I was looking at it, memories of my own trip, my first trip to San Francisco came back from the 60s. I had arrived early in the morning, around 4 o'clock, by Greyhound, and I had to wait until it got lighter before going to look for hotel room. And at some point I got tired waiting in the Greyhound, and so I walked down the street towards Market Street. At the time, the Greyhound terminal was on, I believe, 6th or 7th between Market and Mission, about half a block from Market Street. And as I got to the corner, I heard these street bell sounds, which I hadn't seen since childhood. And so my memory was racing back as I was standing there near Market Street. And then I watched this ghost from the past, this trolley, go down Market Street. So the experience of that experience came back to me. And I asked my friend where she had obtained the film, and she told me, well, there is this person in Pennsylvania who also ironically happened to be a friend of mine. So as soon as I got off the plane back in New York, at the time I was living in New York, I called her up. I asked her if I could get a copy of the film, and she said, of course. And I got a copy, and I looked at the film with no intention of making a film for maybe 3-4 months. And then I felt I needed to tap the material somehow. But at the same time, I also wanted to preserve the original. I tried to find a balance between bringing up things that I was interested in, at the same time not overstepping, not standing in front of the camera. I wanted the original to be there too. So it was a tricky thing trying to find a balance between the two. And what I ended up doing is, at the time, what I thought was the best way to deal with that. And that's where the title Eureka comes, in part. Eureka. I found it. I found the film. But what does it mean? I found a number of different things. Again, if you just recall for a second the anecdote I just gave you, mentioning coming to terms that I had to deal with aspects of my own life and life of my parents. It was also something that I found within the original film and looking at this film in Europe. So these things were. I'm also much interested in the history of cinema, the period, the turn of the century, the Industrial Revolution. Cinema is a child of the Industrial Revolution. It's a machine. It's not an electronic toy. It's a machine, a toy of the machine age, in a way. And its history spans that, comes from that. And I'm interested in the character of film. Towards the end of the film, you have this old man with a white beard and a bowler hat. If you squint a little bit, he very much looks like Edward Muybridge in his old age. A photographer who took these, among other things, panoramas of San Francisco, which was on my mind when I was making Sidewalk Shuttle. And also these photographs called Animals in Locomotion, as I suppose you're familiar with. And then there's the sign, 1896. It's not only a tomb, if you wish, a grave stone, but also a reminder of a century, And here you have this person from another century, the 19th century, looking at us, and we're looking at him. What a bizarre thing. So strange. So these are some of the things that propelled me to, do what I, work with this film, or bring it out. Yeah. Yes, I do. Yeah. It's a bizarre medium. No, I've never done that. But ironically, due to an award I got, I will have a exhibit in San Francisco at the end of this month, my own gallery show, and I will have some of my photographic work in that exhibition. title of the work, by the way, is called, I know, possibly none of you will come, but Brother, Can You Spare Some Time? Okay. Didn't want to use the word brother in it, but the song, in 1930 song, I felt taking it out, just the reference to the Depression, if not the 30s, would be gone, and I needed to have that reference, so I had to keep the word brother in. Anything else you'd like to bring up or respond to? Anything? Okay, you've been wonderful. Thank you very much.